The Wizards did not have a lot of options, and this is where it becomes hard to kind of analyze this trade, because as an organization they get an F, right? If you want to expand the timeline and say we could have had how many first round picks, we could have had a good young player, whether it was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander himself. I mean, what if a couple of years ago the Michael Winger as GM led Clippers, when searching for a co-star for Kawhi Leonard, were able to call the Wizards instead of the Thunder and say, hey, we want Bradley Beal, not Paul George. I don't think that would have happened, but could the Wizards have had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? Who knows? That's kind of the point here. We don't even know fully, and we can never know fully what the opportunity cost was of not making the move a couple of years ago, as Beal continuously led teams that did not come close to being championship level competitive. So again, I feel bad when we talk about this on some level, because it just feels like you're just hammering Beal over and over and over. And Bradley's a good basketball player, but he is not the best player on a championship team. He's going to be really good in Phoenix. I don't know if he's exactly what they need, but again, he'll be very good there. He will slot into a role where he can thrive. He's going to keep a lot of the efficiency he's had. His game will look completely different, and that's great. And they've famously got a great medical staff out there, assuming that they haven't fired everybody, because the new ownership, they're definitely making a lot of moves. So hopefully he can stay healthy. But okay, here they weren't very good. They didn't have a path to being good. And they didn't create one until they had gotten to the dead end sign, after there were 50 signs leading up to it that said dead end ahead. And now here they are, and they're like, okay, I guess we turn around now. And I do think Winger and Dawkins had kind of two options. And this is speculatory on my part. I'm not reporting anything. This is just looking at the situation and reading some of the reporting from Josh Robbins and David Aldridge and Woj and others, right? It seemed like they could have done a deal centered around DeAndre Ayton, the Suns' young center who they signed to an extension they didn't want to last year, who spent a lot of last year fighting with his head coach, Monty Williams. Williams ultimately fired. But the Pacers signed him to an offer sheet, and the Suns had the choice, let him go or keep him as an asset. And they chose to keep him, and they kept him the entire year instead of trading him at the deadline. And if the Wizards had said DeAndre Ayton is someone we think we can build around, they could have probably had DeAndre Ayton. Instead, what they've chosen is a path of maximum flexibility. And I think it's important to explain what that means and what that allows them, because I think a lot of people will initially look at this without an understanding of kind of how NBA business is done, or just some kind of more surface level understanding, and go, oh, this is stupid. Okay, cool. Now you'll have a lot of cap space, but no one's going to want to sign here. That's correct. But the good news is, when you have cap space, you can take on bad contracts. And when you take on bad contracts, you get a little token nugget that's probably a decent first-round pick. And you do a bunch of those, and then you can package those first-round picks into a better first-round pick. Or if you are a team that has multiple firsts and you're a desirable enough destination, superstar becomes unhappy, team sours on star. Hey, you want 2 firsts for Ja Morant, Zion Williamson, LaMelo Ball, whoever it is, you make that move. You want 5 firsts for whoever the next Kawhi Leonard is, or the next Paul George is, that level of superstar. Maybe not Paul George, but Kawhi. And that's the thing with that Paul George Clippers move, is that move, by getting Paul George, Kawhi Leonard signed there. Without Paul George, no deal. So it's kind of like you were trading for both, which is why they gave up Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and I think it was 7 picks. It was nuts. So you put yourself in position by acquiring assets. The problem And ideally, like that's a one-step process. You trade Beal, you get assets in return. Unfortunately for the Wizards, because of the no trade clause, they're going to have to do this in a multi-step process. And this is going to be painful, and it's going to take a while. And unless they just absolutely crush the draft, they're probably not going to be good for 3 to 5 years. The good news is, if it happens in the right 3 to 5 years, and you're really bad in the right 3 to 5 years, you could get the kind of talent that builds a champion. You're the Seattle Supersonics into the Oklahoma City Thunder in 2008 through 10, I think it was. And in consecutive drafts, you draft Jeff Green, Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden. You ultimately flip Green for other stuff. You ultimately flip Harden after you make an NBA Finals with all of them at 22 years or older, younger. And while you never win a championship, you compete for a decade. Can't ask for much more than that. You can ask for a championship, but you can't guarantee it. What you can do with awesome players is guarantee that as long as they're healthy, you're going to be competitive for a decade. And that's what the Thunder ultimately did. You can, if you're bad in the right, maybe not quite as good talent haul run, you're right in the right spot and take some high-risk type of players, you can do what Philadelphia's done. They missed on a lot. The process was not a high hit rate thing. But they hit on Embiid. And they did enough with the rest of the pieces, the Noels, the Fultzes, and trades and whatever. And they got Maxey right later in the draft later on. That they've won 50 games 4 of the last 6 years. And I know it's harder than ever to draft the guy in the top 5, and that the world's best players now are all guys that have seemingly been drafted outside of it. Jokic, the ultimate anomaly as the 41st pick. Giannis at 15. But Embiid was 3rd. He's your reigning MVP. And we'll see like what some of the other top players. Luka's a top 5 pick. He was 3rd. Some of these other guys, we'll see. Anthony Edwards looks like he's on the up and up. Could he enter that top 5 player conversation? He was a number 1 overall pick. Like, I would just ask you this. Would you rather have multiple firsts and high firsts or not? You would rather have them. You don't want to rely on having to get lucky on Nikola Jokic. So what this is going to be is a multiple step process where, you can go on Pro Basketball Reference in 5 years and see what the Wizards wind up with and trace some draft pick on 7 different trades that ultimately the Wizards acquire. But what they've done now is give themselves maximum flexibility to do that. So to long winding road back to the point. We've wandered through the dead end and now we're back on some kind of street with some signage. The point is, DeAndre Ayton would have, been a solid basketball player who helped you win games. Not that interested in that this year. Sorry. Hey, you're good. Which is, by the way, why they have to trade Porzingis and why Chris Paul can't play here. If Chris Paul and Kristaps Porzingis play in the Eastern Conference, they're going to mess around and might win as many games as the Wizards did last year. I know that's not a terribly high bar, but if those dudes were to stay healthy and play 30 minutes a night, Porzingis and Paul together with some of the other young players they have with Chris Paul's leadership, they'd mess around and win 35, 38, 40 games. Get those guys out of here. Not interested. See ya. But there's also no money on the books moving forward with anybody significant. Paul, last year of his deal. Shamet, last year of his deal. Ayton would have been 3 more years. Now, for any of those years, while you rebuild through the draft, you can take on any bad contract in the league for the small price to pay of 1 or more first-round picks that you don't currently have. It is the exact opposite mantra, the exact opposite theme, the exact opposite strategy of the Tommy and really Ernie philosophy of bleep them picks, get me Bojan Bogdanovic in the middle of the season so that I can lose in the second round instead of the first. And if you take nothing else out of the last 10 minutes or whatever it's been since I've been talking this segment, it is that they are now on the polar opposite path of the Grunfeld era, and I think that will cause many of you to rejoice. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Now, for contract purposes and trade purposes, the Wizards are a year too late, at least. We talked about that earlier. But there's another factor that makes them a year too late as well, and this one probably frustrates me as much as any of them. I will tell you why next on the Team 980.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.